The bitter wind whistled through the cracks in the old windmill walls, a haunting melody that Odette Penley had grown accustomed to over the past fortnight. At 23 years of age, she had already endured more hardship than most would face in a lifetime. The plague had claimed her parents 2 summers past, and the recent war had taken her husband, leaving her with nothing but grief and an uncertain future. Odette huddled closer to the small fire she had managed to build, tucking a strand of her long golden hair behind her ear. Despite the soot that smudged her delicate features and the threadbare dress that hung loosely on her slender frame, her beauty remained undimmed. Her blue eyes, though shadowed with sorrow, still held a spark of determination that refused to be extinguished. The worn fabric of her peasant dress offered little protection against the chill, its neckline frayed and somewhat lower than propriety might dictate, revealing her collarbone and hinting at the feminine curves that hunger had not yet managed to diminish. She pulled her tattered shawl tighter around her shoulders, trying to preserve what little warmth the fire provided. Beside her lay a crumpled letter, delivered just days ago by a weathered messenger who had seemed eager to depart the moment it left his hands. The letter had brought news that her great-uncle, a man she had never met, had passed away and left her his sole possession, an abandoned windmill on the outskirts of Millbrook village. The inheritance had seemed like cruel jest at first. What use was a crumbling windmill to a woman who had lost everything? Yet having nowhere else to go, Odette had made the journey to claim her meager inheritance. Upon arrival, the villagers had regarded her with suspicion, their whispers following her as she made her way to the dilapidated structure that now served as her home. The windmill had clearly been abandoned for years, its sails broken and immobile, the grinding stones silent, the interior filled with dust and cobwebs. A soft whine drew her attention to the floor, where a scraggly dog lay watching her with soulful eyes. The animal, a thin, shaggy creature with patches of missing fur, had been waiting at the windmill when she arrived, another unwanted bequest from her great-uncle. "At least we have each other, Max," Odette murmured, reaching down to scratch behind the dog's ears. Max had proven to be her only friend in this strange place. The villagers kept their distance, crossing to the other side of the road when they saw her approaching. Only the miller's son, a boy of 7 named Thomas, had shown any kindness, bringing her a loaf of bread his mother had baked. The old man who lived here was strange, Thomas had told her, his eyes wide with childish wonder. They say he talked to the wind and collected secrets. Odette had smiled at the boy's imagination, but his words lingered in her mind as she explored her new home. The windmill consisted of 3 levels, the ground floor where the grain would have once been stored, the middle level with the grinding stones, and the upper level where the gears connected to the sails. Every surface was covered in dust, and odd collections of items were stacked in corners, jars filled with dried herbs, books with faded covers, and curious mechanical contraptions whose purpose she could not fathom. As the days passed, Odette began the arduous task of making the windmill habitable. She swept away the dust, repaired what she could of the roof, and gathered firewood from the surrounding forest. The physical labor helped to quiet the grief that still echoed in her heart, giving her purpose when all else seemed lost. Max, though, seemed restless. He would pace the ground floor, scratching at certain floorboards and whining insistently until Odette would investigate, only to find nothing but solid wood beneath her fingers. She dismissed his behavior as the quirks of an old dog, focusing instead on her immediate needs: food, warmth, shelter. One morning, as Odette returned from collecting water at the village well, she found a man standing outside the windmill, studying its exterior with a critical eye. He was well-dressed, his clothes marking him as a man of means, though his hard features suggested a hardness of character that matched his apparent wealth. "You must be the great-niece," he said without preamble as she approached. "I am Preston Yates, the magistrate of Millbrook." "Odette Penley," she replied, dipping into a small curtsy despite the water bucket that weighed heavily in her hands. "I knew your great-uncle," Preston said, his gaze sliding over her in a way that made her skin crawl. "A peculiar man with peculiar interests. I had hoped to purchase this windmill from him before his untimely demise." I was unaware he had received offers, Odette said, shifting uncomfortably under his scrutiny. Not offers precisely. More discussions of mutual benefit. Preston's smile did not reach his eyes. I would be willing to extend the same courtesy to you. This windmill is hardly a suitable home for a young woman alone. I am grateful for your concern, Odette replied, choosing her words carefully, but I have nowhere else to go. This windmill, humble as it is my home now. A shadow passed over Preston's face, quickly masked by another empty smile. As you wish. Should you change your mind, my offer stands. Good day, Miss Penley. As he walked away, Odette could not shake the feeling that there was more to his interest in the windmill than simple charity. The encounter left her uneasy, and she hurried inside, bolting the door behind her. Max greeted her with excited barks, circling her feet before dashing to a corner of the room and scratching furiously at the floorboards. Not now, Max, Odette sighed, setting down her water bucket. But the dog persisted, his claws making a terrible noise against the wood. To quiet him, Odette knelt beside the dog and examined the floor. Upon closer inspection, she noticed that the boards in this corner did not quite match the others. They were newer, the wood a slightly different shade. Curiosity piqued. She ran her fingers along the edges and felt a slight gap. With trembling hands, Odette wedged her fingers into the crack and pulled. The floorboard lifted, revealing a small space beneath. Inside lay a leather-bound journal, its pages yellowed with age. What have you found, Max? She whispered, lifting the journal from its hiding place. The dog wagged his tail proudly, as if aware of the significance of his discovery. Odette opened the journal carefully, the spine cracking with disuse. The handwriting inside was cramped but legible, belonging to someone who had much to say and little paper on which to say it. The first entry was dated nearly 15 years prior. I have discovered something extraordinary beneath the windmill. The legends speak true. There are caverns below, and within them, treasures beyond imagining. But I am not alone in this knowledge. The magistrate suspects, and his greed knows no bounds. I must be cautious. Odette's heart raced as she turned the pages, reading her great-uncle's account of his discovery. According to the journal, the windmill had been built atop an ancient system of caverns that had once served as storage for a noble family during times of unrest. When the family fled during a rebellion, they had left behind much of their wealth, hidden from the rebels who seized their lands. The Yates family claims ownership now, one entry read, but they are usurpers. The true heirs were scattered, their lineage obscured by time and deliberate obfuscation. I believe I have traced one branch too. The entry ended abruptly, as if the writer had been interrupted. Odette flipped through the remaining pages, finding them blank. Whatever conclusion her great-uncle had reached, he had not recorded it in the journal. A knock at the door startled her so badly that she dropped the journal. Hastily, she shoved it back into its hiding place and replaced the floorboard before answering. Thomas stood outside, his small face pinched with worry. Miss Odette, my father says to warn you. The magistrate is asking questions about you in the village. He does not seem pleased. Thank you, Thomas, Odette said, offering him a smile she did not feel. Tell your father I appreciate his concern. After the boy left, Odette paced the windmill, her mind racing. If her great-uncle's journal spoke true, there was something valuable hidden beneath the windmill, something the magistrate wanted badly enough to intimidate the villagers into helping him acquire it. That night, Odette could not sleep. She lay awake, listening to the wind and the occasional whine from Max, who seemed as restless as she felt. Eventually, she lit a candle and retrieved the journal, reading it again more carefully. Several passages mentioned a mechanism hidden within the windmill itself, a way to access the caverns below. Her great-uncle had been cryptic, perhaps deliberately so, but he had written of the dance of light when the moon is full, and the shadow that points the way. The next day dawned clear and bright, and Odette set about examining every inch of the windmill with new eyes. The grinding stones on the middle level drew her attention, massive, circular stones that would have once turned to crush grain into flour. One stone bore unusual markings around its edge, symbols that did not appear to serve any practical purpose. As Odette traced the symbols with her finger, she heard footsteps outside. Peering through a crack in the wall, she saw Preston Yates approaching, accompanied by two burly men she did not recognize. Her heart pounding, Odette rushed down to the ground floor, where Max was already growling at the door. "Miss Penley," Preston called, his voice carrying through the thin wood. "I have come to discuss my offer again. I believe you will find it most generous." "I am not interested in selling, Mr. Yates," Odette replied, her voice steadier than she felt. "I am afraid I must insist." The false pleasantry had left his tone. "This windmill holds sentimental value for the village. It is not fitting for a stranger to lay claim to it. It was left to me by my great-uncle. I have the legal documents to prove my ownership. Documents can be reinterpreted." The threat in his words was unmistakable. "I will return tomorrow. I suggest you reconsider my offer by then." After they departed, Odette sank to the floor, her legs weak with fear. Max pressed against her, offering silent comfort as she contemplated her options. She could flee, abandon the windmill, and seek her fortune elsewhere. But where would she go? What would she live on? No, she decided. She would stay and discover what secret her great-uncle had protected so fiercely, what treasure the magistrate sought with such determination. That evening, as the sun set, Odette noticed something curious. The fading light streaming through the cracks in the western wall cast elongated shadows across the floor, forming patterns that seemed to shift and dance as the sun moved lower in the sky. One shadow in particular caught her attention, a long, straight line that pointed directly at the center of the room. Remembering her great-uncle's words about the shadow that points the way, Odette followed the line to its endpoint and examined the floorboards there. They appeared ordinary, but when she pressed on them, she felt a slight give. With renewed energy, she cleared away the few pieces of furniture that stood in the area and began to pull up the floorboards. Beneath them, she found not dirt as she had expected, but a stone surface with a circular indentation at its center. "What is this, Max?" she murmured, running her hands over the smooth stone. The dog barked excitedly, his tail wagging as if in recognition. Odette's mind raced back to the grinding stone with its unusual markings. Could it be connected to this hidden stone floor? But how could she move such a massive object by herself? She spent the night pondering the puzzle, and as the full moon rose, casting its silver light through the cracks in the roof, an idea began to form. The next morning, she set about gathering materials, rope, wooden planks, anything she could use to create a system of pulleys. It was back-breaking work, and more than once Odette despaired of success. But the thought of Preston Yates returning with his threats drove her on. By midday, she had constructed a crude but functional system that might, with luck and determination, allow her to move the grinding stone. As she worked, Max continued his restless pacing, occasionally disappearing up to the middle level only to return whining and pawing at her skirts. "What is it, boy?" she asked, following him up the wooden stairs. The dog led her to the grinding stone and then to a small niche in the wall that she had not noticed before. Inside the niche was a small metal object, a crank handle that appeared to fit into the center of the grinding stone. "Clever, Max," Odette praised, taking the handle and examining it closely. With renewed hope, she attached her ropes to the grinding stone and, using the handle for leverage, began to turn it. The stone moved reluctantly at first, then with increasing ease as it found its old groove. As it turned, the symbols carved around its edge began to align with marks on the stationary base beneath. When the final symbol clicked into place, Odette heard a rumbling from below. Rushing down to the ground floor, she found the stone floor she had uncovered earlier had split open, revealing a narrow staircase descending into darkness. Max barked eagerly, already halfway down the stairs before Odette could stop him. "Wait, Max," she called, grabbing a candle and following cautiously. The stairs led deep into the earth, the air growing cooler and damper with each step. At the bottom, Odette found herself in a small chamber hewn from the living rock. Her candle illuminated stacks of wooden crates and chests arranged along the walls. With trembling hands, she approached the nearest chest and lifted the lid. Inside, gleaming in the candlelight, lay gold coins, jewelry, and gemstones of every color. Each chest she opened revealed similar treasures, the lost fortune of the noble family her great-uncle had written about. But it was not just treasure that filled the hidden chamber. On a stone table in the center of the room lay documents, letters, land deeds, family trees carefully preserved in oilcloth. As Odette examined them, the truth of her great-uncle's final discovery became clear. The noble family whose treasure this had been, the rightful owners of the lands now held by the Yates family, had not died out as was commonly believed. They had gone into hiding, changing their name to escape persecution. And one branch of that family had taken the name Penley. Odette sat heavily on a wooden chest, the implications washing over her. She was not just the heir to this treasure. She was the heir to the lands that Preston Yates now claimed as his own. Her great-uncle must have discovered this connection and sought her out, planning to reveal her true heritage. But before she could fully absorb this revelation, Max began barking frantically. Odette heard voices above. Preston had returned, and sooner than promised. "Search every corner," she heard him command. "The old fool must have left some indication of where it is hidden." Odette quickly gathered the most important documents, stuffing them into her bodice. She had to escape, to reach the village and seek help from Thomas's father, who had shown her kindness. But the only exit was the staircase that led back up to the windmill, where Preston and his men now searched. Looking around desperately, Odette noticed that one wall of the chamber showed signs of recent excavation, her great-uncle's work, perhaps. Following the rough tunnel, she found it led to a natural cavern with a small underground stream flowing through it. "This way, Max," she whispered, picking up the dog and wading into the cold water. The stream led away from the windmill, eventually emerging in a small ravine some distance from the village. Soaked and shivering, Odette made her way to the miller's home, where she was taken in with surprised concern. "The magistrate is searching my windmill," she explained between chattering teeth. "I need help." The miller, a sturdy man named Oliver, exchanged looks with his wife. "Preston Yates has long held power in this village through fear," he said grimly. "But there are those who would stand against him if given cause." "I believe I have such cause," Odette replied, pulling the damp documents from her bodice and explaining what she had discovered. Word spread quickly through the village, and by nightfall, a group had gathered, farmers, craftsmen, and others who had suffered under Preston's harsh rule. Armed with the truth and the evidence to support it, they marched to the windmill where Preston and his men were still searching. "Preston Yates," Oliver called out, his voice carrying in the night air. "You are trespassing on land that belongs to Miss Penley, not just by inheritance from her great-uncle, but by right of her bloodline." Preston emerged from the windmill, his face contorted with rage. "What nonsense is this? This girl is nothing, a penniless widow with no claim to anything of value." "These documents say otherwise," Odette said, stepping forward with the papers that proved her lineage. "They show that my family were the rightful lords of these lands before your ancestors seized them during the rebellion. The law of restoration would return them to me." No court would hear such an outlandish claim. Preston sneered, but there was fear behind his bravado. "The king's magistrate in the next county might take interest," said another villager, a former clerk who understood such matters, especially when accompanied by evidence of tax fraud and intimidation that has long been whispered about. Faced with the united front of the villagers and the damning evidence Odette possessed, Preston's courage faltered. His men, sensing the shifting tide, melted away into the darkness, unwilling to stand against the entire village. In the days that followed, Odette's life transformed. With the help of the villagers, she secured her claim to both the windmill and the treasure hidden beneath it. More importantly, she began the process of challenging Preston's hold on lands that rightfully belonged to her family. The windmill, once abandoned and decrepit, became the center of a new beginning. Odette used part of her newfound wealth to restore it, not as a mill, but as a home and workshop. In the ground floor, where Max had first discovered the hidden journal, she established a garden unlike any the villagers had ever seen. Using seeds and cuttings found among her great-uncle's possessions, rare herbs and plants collected from distant lands, Odette created an indoor garden that flourished in the unique conditions of the windmill. The circular space, with its varying levels of light and the constant gentle movement of air through the structure, proved ideal for cultivating plants that would not survive in the harsh local climate. Word of her unusual garden spread, drawing visitors from neighboring villages and eventually from the larger towns beyond. They came to see the exotic flowers and medicinal herbs that grew in profusion inside the old windmill, marveling at the transformation of the once derelict structure into a place of beauty and healing. Preston Yates, his crimes exposed and his power broken, fled the region before he could be brought to justice. The lands he had wrongfully held were gradually returned to their rightful owner, and Odette found herself in the unexpected position of becoming a lady of means and influence. But she never forgot her humble beginnings or the kindness shown to her by the villagers when she had nothing. She established a fund to help those in need, particularly widows and orphans left destitute by war or illness. The windmill became not just her home but a symbol of hope for the entire community, a place where beauty could grow from abandonment and prosperity from loss. And Max, the faithful companion who had led her to her destiny, lived out his days in comfort, proudly patrolling the windmill and gardens as if he had known all along what treasures lay waiting to be discovered. As for Odette, her golden hair now adorned with flowers from her garden rather than dulled by soot and despair, she found that her greatest inheritance was not the treasure or the lands, but the knowledge that even in the darkest times, seeds of hope could be cultivated until they blossomed into a future brighter than she had ever dared to imagine.